All right, everyone. Hi there. I'm Professor Shane Snipes here at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about the program that we developed starting back in 2017 called the Citizen Entrepreneur Explorers Program, or CEEP. The CEEP is really designed to give teachers a way to teach research in the classroom and also to engage their students in what I call community-centered education, where they go back to their communities, they engage with their communities, and they learn about their neighborhoods in a special kind of way. In this seminar, we'll focus on how CEEP helps you teach entrepreneurship in the classroom using really specific technical and scientific research as a foundation. And we do it in a way that I think is pretty approachable when it comes to getting students engaged with the research process. So starting out this morning, I wanted to go ahead and share my screen and do a little bit of overview of who we are and what we're doing. So this is in the session with me today, we have Jessica Pitts, Raymond Luo, and Tristan Rodriguez. They're three research assistants who've been working with the Citizen Entrepreneur Explorers program. And today they're going to be talking a little bit about some of their experiences with the CEEP program and how it's been for them, how they interact with students. We'll have a discussion section after we go over the foundation of what CEEP is. So that'll be the piece of this. We are recording it, so feel free to share it with colleagues and friends and other folks that you might have involved in entrepreneurship education or in teaching research, or who are just looking for something new and interesting to add to their research and education experiences. Today, when we go through this piece, I want to talk about the benefits of what CEEP has at the fingertips of teachers. And that is, it's easy to implement in the sense that we already have the worksheets built out for it. We already have the steps and the structure in place. It really is great for implementing it across a classroom curriculum. So if you wanted to add a layer of CEEP to the class, you could do it that way. It's also possible to make it a standalone class project because each of the pieces of the worksheets could be done over the course of 5 weeks if you wanted to do each step each week. Another option is to do it a week-long workshop format where students might come for summer, and this is a type of format that they might use for that. There's also free resources available on the website. We're constantly developing new ones, everything from how do we collect our own research data on the back end about the impact that CEEP is having, to resources and worksheets and faculty guides that we're putting together around the CEEP program. And then we also offer faculty support. I'm here for the next few years, thanks to the Kauffman Foundation grant. That allows me to provide support to faculty who have specific questions, who want to meet with me on Zoom and be engaged with CEEP and see the benefits of it. So what is the CEEP program? It really teaches students about research, and not necessarily a generic sense of a research paper, but more how to develop a formal research structure and do something that they're particularly interested and excited to learn about. So that could be something, a question about a specific type of business, or it could be a question about a specific type of product or service that they see in their neighborhood. It could also be a more general question about human behavior and how it interacts with business locally. So there are different ways that a faculty or student might be involved and engaged in this particular way of uncovering and discovering research. It also helps students to learn how to gather information, or what we call collect data, and do it on a first-hand basis. So these days we get a lot of surveys, right? So surveys are a pretty standard thing that everyone's getting anytime they buy something, and that is a type of market research. What we ask of our students in the CEEP program is that they go a level deeper and that they spend a little more time and a little more thought in the style and technique of the research that they're going to go for. We'll go into more details about this too. And then the emphasis of the importance of identifying a specific type of entrepreneurial community that they want to study that is close to them. When we do neighborhood type entrepreneurship studies, it becomes a little bit more personal. and it can also be a little bit more intimidating, which is an exciting thing for any student to engage in because they're approaching their fears and they're addressing maybe shyness that they might have. They're also learning to interact and engage with people around a specific subject, get people excited about something that they're doing. So it teaches them a lot of things at one time. I would say, what is research as teaching? So we are using a methodology, a technique that has been around for some time. And what we want to do is we want students to actually develop a proper research question that has enough depth that it will give them a chance to interact with their neighborhood, come up with a set of data, and then figure out if they've actually answered it or not. Because sometimes people will come up with a question that's a very straightforward marketing question, like how many products does someone buy? But they don't ever get to a deeper research question, which is what the CEEP program helps students to do. It also helps anytime we're thinking about using research as a teaching tool, it is the style, the method of doing research is the teaching experience. So in those first steps of data collection, students are learning to do public speaking and engaging with small groups of people, as well as coming up with something and testing it to see if it's viable. So students can develop self-esteem through this process too. It invites critical and evaluative thinking necessary for learning. We know that in this day and age, with all this information, all this data, all these things coming at us, we have these supercomputers in our hands and they give us access to all this information, but we don't necessarily have the tools to critically analyze and evaluate this information that's coming at us. So the process of CEEP teaches them that through the research methods. You'll see here on the left-hand side in these images, these are snapshots of some of the worksheets that we've developed. Jessica and Raymond have worked on these worksheets several times. We've had different iterations of them. We brought them forward. We've reevaluated them based on student feedback and how well the students were able to follow the steps. So we've got that as part of the development of our worksheets. How does the CEEP program involve research as teaching? So when we're talking about the 5 steps of CEEP, this is what it is for us. There's a question formulation, and then you come up with a method of some kind where you're going to gather that information or data. And then you're going to do data collection around that method. So if we decide we want to do interviews, then we'll come up with, in our methodology determination, we'll come up with, here's a set of questions that we want to ask that are related to the question that we have as our primary overarching idea or supposition, should we say, or hypothesis. So I might say, what is going on with the structures in New York City for restaurants, and how could I evaluate these structures, right? So that's a very general overall research question, still not specific enough. So after 1 or 2 iterations of evaluations, peer evaluations, and teacher evaluations, the question gets refined and it might become more specific in certain ways. And you'll see an example of that when Jessica and Raymond talk about how some of their students have come up with certain types of research that really had a very deep level of engagement because of the student's passion, that you might guess, wow, I would never imagine the student would be excited about this particular subject, but they were able to pull apart and refine a question, refine a methodology, add additional methods on top of that, do multiple sets of data collection, do analysis of the results of that. Sometimes they can do it because it's a survey. So the charts and graphs these days and surveys are often done for you on the back end and the results. And then they've added additional supplemental analysis, sometimes with interviews and other components. The community outreach component of CEEP makes our program very special because it's oftentimes you'll have students walk through this kind of scientific method of doing research where you're gathering information and doing analysis on it. But we gather the data, we gather things from our neighborhood, from our community, but we don't ever give it back. So in our case with CEEP, we're actually giving it back, which gives us a level of citizenship, a level of community, or a level of connection that most people don't do when they're doing their research for their startup idea or their research for a class project. So our students actually go and select a community organization in the neighborhood where they gathered the data. So it could be a church, it could be a community group, it could be a business association, but it has to be hyper-local. It could even be a neighborhood association, a block association that's talking about the specific block in New York City. Here in New York, we have that kind of, those types of groups that get together and talk about their neighborhoods. So you can imagine how excited they would be if a student came to them and said, hey, I looked at these types of stores in the neighborhood, and this is what I came up with. And they gave a 5-6 minute presentation. When they do that, it's this special kind of connection that we really can't deny what happens when it does. Is it scary for the student? Yeah, I think so, because it is public speaking, and it is in the public speaking, not just public in terms of standing in front of classmates. So that adds another layer to our program that makes it special. So I, at this point, want to offer an opportunity for our other folks who are on the call here with us, Raymond and Jessica, to just give some examples of what this has looked like in the classroom for them. I will add them to our spotlight here so that you can see them, and they'll be part of the conversation with us. And Raymond, I'll start with you. I would welcome a chance for you to talk about one or two types of research that students have presented to you, and what that process was like working with those students.
Yeah, so one of the common themes that a lot of students kind of brought up were they were really engaged and motivated about a very broad topic that might have been really relevant to them. In particular, last semester, there was one student that came up to me. He said he wanted to observe gentrification in his neighborhood, which was quite a mighty large task for a student who never had engaged on this type of level of research before. So I redirected him to look at specific instances of where gentrification could be observed. So he found on the topic on observing gentrification and the impact of restaurants and bars. And at the end of the research program, we had extensive talks, like basically every week or every other week. And we developed methods of observing this kind of overarching, general, broad, kind of abstract view of gentrification through a series of surveys and interviews to various individuals in his neighborhood. And I felt like there was a considerable level of progress throughout the couple of months, because over time, you kind of see his way of thinking became more systematic. We created rather systematic ways of developing the survey questions, interview questions, so that it was really clear to him how each interview question or every survey question was used to either motivate the person he was interviewing to keep on being engaged with this conversation, and to get more, let's say, conclusive results on his topic. We used things like Likert scales, and then we also talked about ways to present his results in ways that could be more visual or dynamic and analytic for the purposes of his results.
Great, Raymond, that's a perfect example. When students are able to dig into their question and come up with something like this, and the exciting part about working with students is you don't know what they're going to be excited about, right? So every time we kind of have this moment of, okay, what are they going to pick this time? Or can they build on something that another student has done? So we've started to direct some students into specific categories so that maybe they can start to build a storehouse of data and analysis that's across New York City, and looking at these different issues. So Jessica, I would welcome you now a chance to chat about one of the examples that you have seen in the class.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so one of the projects that I worked with a student on, she was interested. So it kind of taps into, so a lot of students use their interests. So in the class, they also have to put together a business project. And this person also tapped into that in her project. So she was interested in opening a food cart or in her neighborhood. And so she used that as the starting point for her research. So she was basically looking to see whether what the perspective of business owners were in the neighborhood about giving back to the community. So specifically restaurants in terms of food that they didn't sell, did they feel a responsibility to give that back to the community? So we worked together to come up with a set of questions. So she did this interview style, so she went in person and basically asked owners how they felt about, do they feel an obligation to give back to the community? And she was surprised at the results that a lot of them said they didn't feel any obligation. And so we worked with creating graphs for her and also synthesizing the data, since she did have like interview style data as well. And one thing that was noteworthy is that when she did report back to the community, there wasn't a dialogue that was opened up, because many of the residents were surprised that the places that they patroned in their local neighborhood didn't feel like a responsibility to give back. And she also asked specifically, like, any type of, if businesses felt any type of obligation. So such as it could be giving food back, it could be supporting the local homeless community. And so this is like the kind of like a great example of a CEEP project that sparks debate, sparks conversation in the neighborhood about something that's currently going on. So she contextualizes her paper by talking about the large population of homeless people. I think she lived in Harlem. That was her neighborhood. And so she really contextualized that. And so that was one of my favorite projects to work with a student on, because it did spark a debate when she did present her findings to the community.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how people don't know what's going on their block or just around the corner. And when someone chooses to start to analyze entrepreneurship in a specific way locally, it can open up all kinds of conversation. So that's exciting. The other image that you see here on the screen of examples of programs in action is actual structural analysis that a student decided to do, because all the most of the restaurants in New York City that stayed in business decided to do some type of outside structure on the street or on the sidewalks, in the parking spaces right in front of the buildings. They built out these physical spaces for people to be in, to be outside, so they could be safe. So this student actually went around and surveyed all the different ones and cataloged the type of materials that were being used on these structures. And from that, he had a couple of conversations also with the actual owners about the type of profitability they felt like they had, whether they felt like the structures were useful or not. So I found this one that was pulled up here that's shown on the screen as another one. And you can see that he didn't do a huge survey, but to have a student going around looking at 20 or so, maybe 25 or so different businesses is still a specific project that gets people excited about something. It also teaches them the types of innovation that entrepreneurs have to go through to stay in business. And they hear about it firsthand, and then they deliver it back to the neighborhood in different associations and different organizations. So I was excited to see that. There are these challenges with the curriculum. So this is a big ask for freshmen and sophomores in our particular college. So we're a two-year college, and we have freshmen and sophomores. And I think as individuals, there is this sense of I have to talk to strangers directly. And if you've ever done any type of design thinking in a business class or any type of special kind of class where you're doing that type of work, you'll notice that design thinking kind of puts itself in this place of listening to the customer, people don't necessarily like to talk to strangers. So the challenges to the curriculum really are building those layers and making the steps as simple and easy as possible, which is what CEEP has done. So we took the fear that people have with that direct community engagement, and now we say, okay, these are your opportunities to grow and to expand, and putting the context for what CEEP is in that kind of framework for younger students. Now, as graduate students, if this is used in that context or in the professional environment where I've run the workshop once or twice too, this is a different thing because it serves a purpose to get to connect to your neighborhood. And I think that can live very well in those places. You'll see some scattershot pictures here of actual data that's been collected at different points. This is one of the zip codes where our students have worked. We wanted to go over this information with you. We're excited to have, I see Deanne is here. Good to see you here, Deanne. We're excited to kind of give you a chance to ask us questions. We also have a few other questions that we're going to be talking through. Jessica, Raymond, Tristan have all kind of put together types of questions that you might run into. Since they've been in the program and running it, they're going to sort of pose those things as part of this webinar too. But I welcome anyone who has any questions. If you do, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom system. You'll see that there's a reaction button that you can use there. Citizenpreneurs.com is our website. The downloadable resources are there for you to get. There was a glitch for a few weeks there where the downloads weren't accessible. So if you did try to download and nothing came through for you, do go to citizenpreneurs.com and pull down those resources because they are all batched together for you. And we're here to work with you as partners. Anytime that you want to begin using CEEP or just have questions for us, we're available to answer those questions. All right, I'm just going to hit stop share here for a moment and go into the people mode, and then let's go through some questions. Yeah, and let me know if you do have a question. I'll be glad to unmute you. You can now unmute yourself if you'd like to. And then, hi, Dan. Hi, Deanne.
Hi Shane. Hi Raymond. Jessica. I have a question about, okay, so we go through the entire journey and then report back to the community. What is the next step? Based on Raymond and Jessica, what has the community done with that information, or has there not been enough time for them to actually act on that information? My question is, that last step, it doesn't end there. Like, how is that information being used, especially on the front of the community side? Or intended to be used, or you've heard that they're like, oh, well, this was interesting information. Like, we would like to do X and Y with this.
Oh, I can speak a little bit to that. So currently we're in the process of tracking that impact for the community outreach. I know that for the project I mentioned previously, the community, I'm not sure what they did with that information, but in the report back, the student reported that she reported to community center. So they had access and resources that could potentially help the homeless population in the community and also engage with business owners. But yeah, that's something that we're trying to tap into in terms of tracking, okay, following up with organizations to see, okay, like what impact the research has had on their community. So good question.
Thank you. Raymond, and for you, no one, like, it's still, I know it's still relatively new in the context. So, and with COVID, things are moving way slower and some things way faster. But when it comes to community level, it will be a little bit slower, depending.
Yeah, Raymond, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So this is kind of to chime in and build on what Jessica said. We're in this stage where we're actually sending out, we're reaching out to the community to analyze their feedback and see what they've used on the information. I'd say from my end, it probably hasn't been long enough for a lot of the student feedback to actually build into something yet. And I feel like we're trying to be more systematic with reaching out to these community organizations to see what type of results and impact that our program is having with them. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I'll add here, Deanna, I'll add that within the context of this program, there's sort of the next layer, right? So the curriculum and structuring and fine tuning and making sure that it's as accessible as possible was sort of like step one in the first year or so. And now we're moving on to this next phase where we become a lot more research focused on our own program, making sure that we're giving other people tools to analyze what they're doing as well. So the surveys that we create for collecting feedback from community groups is something that we're offering on the website. So all those pieces that we're adding now are part of it. Another component of this, though, which is why I liked calling the program Citizenpreneurs, is there is a citizen component to it. But that's a level of advocacy and policy and interaction and nonprofit engagement. And there's just like a policymakers community. There are all these people now that can be part of this conversation. And I think that's the final step that we'll get to near the end of the grant, where we have these very robust dialogues around entrepreneurship in the neighborhoods that are centered around these research projects initially, but ultimately can grow into other programs and other types of even starting other initiatives, right? It can lead to all kinds of other leading programs.
Okay. Um, and if anybody else has, I have a few more, but
Yeah, go ahead. Dan,
sure.
and I know Jessica and Raymond have a couple of things they can post too.
Okay. So when it comes to, so you said it's really hyper focused, right? Hyper focus. When it comes to working in communities, there's like this huge, what you just spoke about, this stakeholder component, right? Trying to see where the pieces are, how they fit together, and how they interact with each other. How much of the program is this understanding of the stakeholder ecosystem within their community?
Yeah, I think at this point, because we haven't necessarily driven in at that level, we're
Yeah.
talking about creating multiple types of CEEP curricula. The
Yes.
first is kind of the highest level version that's easily applicable across lots of different types of classes, which is what we have now. And then the second level is to say, all right, so now that we have this, let's add another component to it that makes it more social impact focused, so that there is a social impact curriculum that you could add to it that would allow you to have that kind of engagement, the type of work. So that's the other piece that we're building on. The interesting thing about what Kaufman did with this particular initiative is they said, we really think this is very special just because you're actually delivering your data back to the community.
Yeah.
And they also are excited to groom young researchers into the space of doing research around entrepreneurship. So those are the two things that they found most intriguing. What I find most intriguing is that we can actually have an impact, and we'll be able to track that impact once we get even better at sharing across all these different programs. So as each example of what happens in the classroom gets publicized, it can also become a little box for our students to stand on to say like, oh, hey, look, this is what I did. Is anyone else interested in this research? Or would someone else like to build on this research? And that's the other place that we're going. Yeah.
And all of this is posted on your website to build this type of.
Yeah. And we're getting there. The website has content on it. Now the next phase is like how to build the community around it, and making sure that we have this type of dialogue, whether we use tools like Slack or whether we use tools like other types of tools out there, is what we're deciding during this break time and then picking up with next semester.
And if you don't mind, my last question.
I love it. Keep them
Okay,
coming.
my last question is around personal growth. So you said that as a researcher, talking to strangers, I mean, just a human talking to strangers, it's difficult. And I wonder, do people do, or do participants do a self-reflection from the beginning, like where they are, and at the ending, it's like, oh yeah, by there, I was so afraid to talk to people, and now I could just go out and just go and interview and do these surveys without even sweating, or even going into reporting back, and I feel so much more confident. Is there like this confidence competency that you're also tracking with the personal growth of their soon to be researcher, or I guess a researcher in practice?
Yeah, yeah. Jessica and Raymond, I would ask, have you gotten any specific feedback? Because I have some, but I'd love to hear if your students have spoken about this. Because I know I see the private side, right? So I as a professor, I see their journals,
Ah,
and I read their journals and I read what they talk about. Like, the C project is so hard. I don't know. I can't get my question down. Why isn't this question coming to me? I keep having to go back to it. Why do I have to keep redoing everything? And then they get to a place where they're like a breakthrough, and they go, "Oh, okay, now I get it. I understand that this is I've learned now how to refine something and make it better," which they don't always do, right? Usually someone does an assignment and they turn it in and they're like done with it. But
yeah.
this refinement process is something that's unusual for a lot of our students. So that's one thing that they gained. And then they take that to speaking to the people. I can think of two journal entries that I was very pleasantly surprised that they were like, I can't do it. There's no way. There's no way. How do I even find people to talk to? I don't understand. Like, I'm not going to just talk to strangers. And then a few weeks later, they're like, okay, so I talked to my first business and they're really nice. And I didn't realize that they were human beings too. I thought that they were just going to be like pushing me away. Now there are barriers, like the real challenges that we talked about. There are barriers because a lot of businesses are busy, a lot of owners are busy. And so figuring out how to approach that person
Yeah.
is another skill, right? Like, they're learning how to engage someone with the benefits that person might be experiencing, or they're living off, or they're using the desire we have as human beings to help each other, right? Where they say like, look, I'm a student, I just need your help to finish my assignment. Is there any way? And sometimes I tell them, use that line, because a
Yeah.
lot of people just want to help you, especially if you're a student trying to get something done. And
No one wants to,
uh,
no one wants to know that it's because of them you got a C or an F. So that's a really good strategy as well. Yes. Okay. I was
yeah.
curious about that growth component, like that confidence.
Yeah, it comes out in the journaling. And I think that's where the self-reflection happens a lot more. I have read a few of the final project reviews where they've hinted at that self-reflection, where they've talked about what it felt like to accomplish something like this in their final write-ups, where they aren't as self-reflective as I'd like them to be, despite direction. I think they feel a little more guarded outside the journal space. Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's all my questions.
That's great. And I would just say for Jessica and Raymond, I would pick the one thing that you felt like was the biggest challenge uh, that you've encountered with the students, and some of the ways that they've gotten over those challenges.
I guess I can start with this one. Yeah, it kind of builds on to Dan's last question. It's kind of like the growth aspect. And I'd say it's kind of like a lot of students come into this program or this class course expecting each segment of it, each module of it to be kind of like a homework. They turn it in and it's over. And they expect very much they expect there to be one right answer or one right way to do it. And it's kind of like by the beginning of the semester, they're struggling with it because they don't understand why every single time they submit something after talking with me, that I say like, no, you didn't think about this, or like, no, this isn't like in depth enough or not narrow or specific enough. You didn't engage enough with the topic. And by the end of the semester, they realize that each of these modules are actually like part of each other and that this is like an ongoing process. And then every single thing that they discover has more analysis or more questions to be asked. And this is more of like a way of thinking. So I feel like one of the challenges is kind of like having to keep on reminding the students that there's more to whatever they find, or like they need to be more engaged and not just take everything at face value and not expect us to feed them the answers like in a typical class where you have a lecture and then they go home and they just review the lecture. Yeah.
I would say that for me, students usually have like trouble with the beginning and the end. So the beginning, most of the students are unfamiliar with the research process. So forming a research question, knowing that it has a structure, formatting their topic into research question is difficult for a lot of students. And then once you get over that hurdle, it's kind of the pieces for the most part fall into place for them. And then we come to the last step, which is a community outreach, which is what we've been talking about, which is not part of the normal research process in general. And so a lot of students are also confused. So I think to Raymond's point, I think that last step students don't associate with the research process. And so it's a little bit harder. So the questions I've received from people, kind of the confusion, it's like, so so I have to talk to people again. So to your point of like confidence of like they've already spoken to people, they've already gone out and done work, and then they're like, I have to do it again. I'm like, yes, it's presenting again. So see issues with the beginning and the end. And so those are the hurdles that students most have to overcome.
All right, thank you. I do have more. So, what are their expectations coming into the program?
So
What are
this
their
one,
expectations?
this CEEP program is actually layered across a small business management class. So
Yeah.
small business management is the course title and the majority of the subjects that they do. So what I did is I added the layer of CEEP under for the whole class. So they're still learning HR operations from small business finance, for operations, from an operations perspective. And then this layer of it just kind of gives them a context for connecting back to the world.
Yeah.
As a faculty person, as an instructor, I believe that unless the students connects back to their community, back to their neighborhood, they're really not ever going to experience what entrepreneurship is. So they can have a business plan that they work on throughout the whole course. They can learn about QuickBooks and all those pieces, but the actual engagement with their neighborhood might be the closest thing that they're going to get to the inspiration of actually seeing entrepreneurship happen. And it's not even like watching people and guest speakers come talk about things, which is a completely different process, which a lot of people use in classes like this. So that's why I think in the context of this particular class, it works so well. Now, when Jessica and I did a conference earlier this year, we actually used the CEEP process in a workshop format. And we did all 5 of the steps as a room of people. There are like 8 people who took the workshop. And so those 8 people all did the steps. They developed a research question, they developed a methodology, they went and collected some data from the other people in the room who were playing different roles within that context. So they were able to experience it within that context too. Even in that process, there were learning opportunities and learning objectives for the people in the room that upon reflection myself, I was like, wow, within the context of a workshop, this teaches people things too. But it's not framed that way yet. And that's another part of CEEP that we're developing and building out.
Yeah, because my other question was, is there a training of trainer manual? So I guess that answers that question with it being in a workshop format. Yes.
Yeah, it is kind of the trainer version of it. And it's also a self-awareness and discovery type outcome for a learning objective. So they have that within the workshop of people, even though the room was filled with folks who are scholars and teachers, they too are human beings and they have their own like preconceptions about things. And I saw certain parts of that workshop that I was like, oh, wow, they went in a completely different direction with their question than I thought they would, which was always eye-opening to see that.
And how do you account for the experiential part of it? Because the key part, I think, what I'm understanding of sleep is that there's the experiential going outside and actually doing. Like, how did that compare though with like being inside and going through the process that way?
Yeah, we had such a short time frame. If this was a longer conference or a set of workshops that happened over a set of days, then it would have been possible to kind of step out and do that kind of thing. It could be a day-long workshop too, right? So you could, it's like it's more of a scholarly version of design thinking, if you think of it that way.
Yeah.
Because it's still, its ultimate goal is to teach students a proper research methodology and connection back to the community. It's not necessarily like design thinking, which is to come up with a product that is based on your observations of the people who you've chosen to be your key customers. So there's a different outcome there. And I think for us, it actually serves our purpose more because a lot of our students aren't necessarily developing products and services within that context, but are instead looking to develop a lot more soft skills that would serve them within the context of a career.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. And I know these guys have gone over their material for you and have walked through some things. This is the workshop that we put together, or the webinar that we put together for today. If you have other questions, I'll be glad to chat with you some more. Otherwise, we can follow up with one-on-one meetings and other things like that. But I appreciate you coming on to the conversations that we had today.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll share with you guys a quick thank you again and the information about us. Be sure you stop by and grab some of those downloadable resources that we have right there on our website. We're always open to having dialogues and conversations with you, so reach out to Raymond, Jessica, or myself. We are available for you. My email is something that you can find almost anywhere if you just search for my name. Connect with me on LinkedIn, connect with me from BMCC. I'm available and here to help you. So I look forward to doing that. Thanks so much for being here today. Guys, it's been a pleasure to have all of you here with me. And I am always excited to do these because each time I do them, we get new questions and new information. We're able to share things in new ways. And I hope you found this really, really helpful. Have a great day.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.